your nest egg through a rollover to an IRA backed by physical gold. Take advantage of the long-term stability that gold provides by investing in a gold IRA from Birch Gold Group, the precious metal IRA specialists. Call Birch Gold Group today at 888-999-5191 and receive their free information kit on gold. Call 888-999-5191. That's 888-999-5191.
I'm Lester Holt with NBC Nightly News.
And I'm Chuck Todd with Meet the Press.
We know you can't always watch on our schedule,
so that's why we are always available on yours.
With video on demand, you can watch NBC Nightly News
and Meet the Press
any day of the week,
any time of the day.
In-depth reporting on the day's top stories from NBC Nightly News.
And political conversations, insight, and analysis from Meet the Press.
Watch our latest broadcasts anytime
with video on demand.
From Bristol to Berkeley and West Warwick to Westerly, you're listening to Southern New England's most informative talk lineup. Plus, news, traffic, and weather. Never miss it on News Talk 630 and 99.7 FM.
It's my station.
WPRO. Now, back to the Coalition with Pat Ford and Dave Fisher on News Talk 630 at 99.7 FM, WPRO.
And yes, you are listening to the Coalition on Talk Radio on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter, Coalition_radio. We blog, we post, we stream. We are there for it all. Joining us live today in studio, I think I've got it right this time, Rebecca Neves McGoldrick, Executive Director of Protect Families First.
Yay!
A Rhode Island-based advocacy group exploring the collateral damage of the failed, the abysmally failed, the self-inflicted gunshot wound on America that is called the war on drugs. Let's get right back into it. Let's talk about the streets of Rhode Island right now, because this is, we love the national focus, but let's talk about what's happening every day in Providence. First of all, synthetic drugs are all over the state. A byproduct of the failed war on drugs, of any type of prohibition, is what we'll call the bootlegger effect, where essentially people right now across Rhode Island are in mills or apartments cooking God only knows what, and addicts, people are ingesting them. Just tell us how dangerous it is right now.
So we certainly are seeing a resurgence of heroin, as heroin use has doubled approximately in recent years. Although, from a public health perspective, that wasn't unanticipated. People saw this coming.
Well, that had a lot to do with the prescription opioid epidemic that we went through, that we're still going through now. But, these street-level opioids are a lot easier to get than prescription
Absolutely.
pills.
So what happened was, in the 90s, there was this very serious push on behalf of medical patients, really, to treat pain more aggressively. And what we got was more prescribers willing to give out prescription narcotics. Coupled with that was a lot of new products out in big pharma, of OxyContin especially, made its debut in the 90s, and there were claims that it was non-addictive. So between doctors feeling
and before you know it, people were like knocking over pharmacies to get their hands on stuff.
I know, surprising or not surprising, I guess, but
wait a minute, are you saying Big Pharma lied?
Exactly.
Sure.
And, coupled with this was this very righteous movement, especially among cancer patients, really, to treat their pain more aggressively. What we had was a flooding of these painkillers into American bodies. About 90% of the Vicodin, I believe, in the world is consumed by Americans. So we are overwhelmingly the consumers of prescription painkillers.
And 90% of that is Rush Limbaugh.
Right.
90% of that 90% is Rush Limbaugh.
And so what we saw was this wave. And we didn't really see the transition to heroin until people started cracking down on prescribers. And then prescribers were stopping their patients' prescription. But what we never did was treat the addiction that resulted. So you basically have people who have been given prescription painkillers for years by their prescriber. The prescriber is told, you need to really cut back on the prescriptions you're giving to your patients. They do. Never offer treatment referrals. So inevitably you have people going to the streets.
And you're basically what you're doing is forcing people into withdrawal at that point.
Absolutely.
I mean, given the tolerance effect of opioid drugs, I mean, withdrawal is nothing to sneeze at here, folks. I mean,
absolutely,
it kills people.
It's very, very painful, very excruciating. And so the only thing that stops withdrawal symptoms is to get more opiates into your body. And about 4 out of 5 recent heroin users started with prescription painkillers. So we have to look at, the trend of where this all came from. And yes, absolutely. About now, since 2012, more than half of the overdoses are now accounted for by illicit drugs like heroin are showing up in the toxicology reports. Prior to that, prior to 2012, it was mostly prescription painkillers. So to clarify that narrative.
And doesn't the I mean, between Big Pharma and the war on drugs, I mean, you could see this as kind of an endless cycle of boom
Absolutely.
and bust for prescription opioids, make a boom because everybody wants to get people off heroin, and then people go, oh no, people are getting addicted to this, let's dial this back, and people just shift right back to the street level.
So we lock them up. Our biggest mental health care facilities are all prisons. So yeah, you expose people, you get people addicted, and then crack down, put them to the streets, lock them up. So this is certainly a cycle that we're seeing.
Talk about, if you will, the effect of these drug courts. I mean, about 20 to 25 years ago, if you follow the ebb and tide of American politics, you've gone through this sort of pendulum swing between, three strikes and you're out. Then what was seen at the time as progress was the fact you would have a drug court. A drug court would specialize in focusing on day-to-day, we'll call them lifestyle drug-type crimes, and provide incarceration and then incarceration, and there really never was the follow-up. Give us a practical snapshot of that.
Yep, so drug courts are particularly egregious, especially around the issue that we're getting into around overdose, because they encourage flash incarceration. So people are committed for short periods of time, days normally, and within days your tolerance is actually going down. So again, it's taking someone off of the street, out of their home, locking them up for a period of days, basically forcing them through withdrawal very quickly through detox, and then putting them back out on the street without ever offering them an treatment or recovery service.
Hey, you got it all out of your system in 6 days.
Exactly.
So you're on your own.
Exactly.
And you're literally, and let's talk about the pathology of addiction. You're putting them back into the very neighborhoods, the very circumstances from which, let's just say, the addictive behavior was additionally generated. You're surrounding them by the very same people who fed into their addiction. At the same time, you're providing literally no safety net, and given the paucity and the grotesque level of underfunding for addiction treatment, you're essentially throwing these people to the wolves, aren't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And some of the most at-risk populations that we see are the people who are awaiting trial. They're held and then released, maybe 3 days later, and that's when we're seeing really high numbers of overdose.
So your most recent fight at the State House is about this, the Good Samaritan Act.
Correct.
Okay, so why don't you give our listeners an idea of what the law entails as it stands, why you'd like to see it extended and expanded.
Absolutely. So currently, Rhode Island does have a Good Samaritan Law that was passed in 2012 by the legislature, and that was really an important step in progress. Several states, now 23 states plus Washington, D.C., have some version of a Good Samaritan Law that basically is meant to encourage people to call 911 in the event of an overdose. So in 2012, the Rhode Island legislature passed a Good Samaritan Law, but that law is due to expire on July 1st this year.
Can I just jump in for a second? Is this another one of these, in a sense, held for further study? Why would you sunset?
That I think to me is one of the biggest concerns, is at what point in the future are we going to say, yes, it's okay to recriminalize people when they call 911 in the event of an overdose?
Right.
Right. I don't know if at any point in the future that will make sense, so I don't know why sunset provisions are put on, especially, and even if, so the first one that we had since 2012 to 2015 that's about to expire, they wanted to collect data. the data is there that they really, the legislature wanted this data to see, did this law obstruct law enforcement from prosecuting drug rings, taking down drug rings. And there is no evidence that this has deterred any of law enforcement's work, but it does greatly incentivize people to call 911 in the event of an overdose. So now
I think
that we have
is
that
just
data,
reprehensible that their default go-to, like, what data we need is not, are we saving lives? Are more people not dying because of this law?
So,
that seems so completely cart before the horse to me, and almost inhuman.
And I think that that's what's particularly unfortunate about this other version that has been introduced is another sunset. It will sunset. The next version is due to expire in 2017. So I guess in 2 more years we're going to weigh whether or not it's okay to arrest people if they call 911, if they seek medical assistance to save someone's life, which really does seem absurd. But really what we were fighting for this legislative session to expand our Good Samaritan Law, whatever version is passed this year, is a version that we hope expands on the protections that are already afforded to people. So right now, a lot of people are covered, are protected if they call 911 in the event of an overdose. But one of the most at-risk demographics is not protected, and that is people who are on parole and probation. So Rhode Island has relatively short sentencing periods compared to other states, but we have very long parole and probation periods. So people may be on parole or probation for 10 years after they serve their sentence. And what that means is essentially if, say, a father who may have, been released 10 years ago is still on parole and probation, his daughter might be having an overdose, and he has to weigh in his mind whether or not to call 911 to save his daughter's life, because that could be a violation of his terms of parole or probation.
Right, and
associating with the criminal
exactly,
element.
And his home can be seen then as a drug house, and could be subject to acid forfeiture and any of the other tentacles, the beast.
And probation parole violations have a much, much lower bar. There's no probable cause. There's no reasonable suspicion.
As soon as the handcuffs are on, that's it.
That's it, right.
So this is, overdose is the #1 killer of people leaving prison. Again, we lock people up for drugs, never really provide them with treatment and mental health care, release them, never treated an addiction. And, I guess, to me, it's kind of like, why are people surprised that people leave prison and they relapse? Right. We never gave them treatment.
Well, and it's like taking a person and saying, you don't have the tools you need. So what we're going to do is we're going to sequester you for a few days, a few months, a few years, not help you fill that toolbox.
Yep.
And then just dump you back out on the same streets.
With additional burdens like now you can't get a job.
Right, now you're a felon that has to check a box.
Exactly. So good luck with that, hope you're all right is what we are doing to people who are struggling with substance use issues. And I do the overdose prevention trainings at the ACI, so I train inmates who are about to be leaving within 30 to 60 days on overdose prevention. And these people are terrified to get out. They know what awaits them, and it's a lot harder to keep your life in order outside when you haven't, like you said, refilled that toolbox.
Right. Right. So, and let's put it in historical perspective. The failed war on drugs has been in place since the Nixon administration.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the notion that law enforcement hasn't figured out yet what works and doesn't work in terms of drug interdiction.
50 years later.
50 years later, these leading minds haven't. And that, of course, when I talk about leading minds, no other name comes before me but our own august Attorney General, Mr. Kilmartin, who is riding the opposition to this hard. What could possibly be his motivation?
So, actually, the Providence Journal covered a bit of the Attorney General's opposition to this and included a letter that the Attorney General sent to the House Judiciary Committee. And in that letter, it gives a really good picture into what is going on in the Attorney General's mind on this issue. As you may or may not know, that at the bill hearings, the Attorney General was the only person in opposition to this very common sense legislation, literally just saying we should be saving lives.
Right.
That should be our primary goal. It's not to make an arrest, it's to save a life.
Have you had any other support from other law enforcement, other police unions,
There hasn't been
chiefs?
much